Hey there. Welcome back to On Our Pursuit. Got an extra special episode for you today. I think this might be the episode that makes you think and feel the most out of all the episodes to date. My guest is Ryan Russell. Ryan is the founder of 20 over 10. He is a professor at Penn State, a tenured professor at Penn State at that. And more importantly, he is a father and a husband with a beautiful family. One of the reasons I wanted to have Ryan on the podcast was to talk about his passion of design and how he was able to take that to the world of finance to create 20 over 10, which was eventually a company that he sold to FMG. You don't have to worry about being a financial advisor to know those companies. That's just a part of his story. But the real reason I wanted him to join me and the real reason this episode is so important is earlier this year, Ryan found out he had a grade 4 glioblastoma. If you know anything about cancer and specifically brain cancer, you know that's not the diagnosis that you want to hear. Now, before we get further, I have no doubts that Ryan is going to beat cancer and he's going to kick this glioblastoma's ass. No doubts at all. And when you hear him and you see him, you're going to understand why. But nonetheless, he had a scary, life-changing event that changed perspective for him. And I wanted to learn from him and share with all of you what he's learned through this experience and give that to you ahead of you receiving a diagnosis. Now, one of the things we talk about in the episode that I bring up is that technically we all have the same diagnosis. We all are one day closer, 1 minute closer, 1 second closest to our own death. Yet we all go living on life like we have infinite amount of time. But when we have this diagnosis from a doctor that, as Ryan says, lets us know that maybe our movie might be closer to the end than somebody else's, then perspective change. But we shouldn't wait for that event to change our perspective and change the way we live our life. And I'm hoping that his story will motivate you to take some time to look at what it is that you're doing and figure out what's most important to you and make changes within your life. So if you ever got a diagnosis, which I hope you don't, similar to Ryan's, you don't have to make a big change. You don't have to change the life because you were already doing that ahead of it. Now, I want to point out a few things to really pay attention to. The first off is I want you to pay attention to what Ryan says is the thing he values the most. It's time. But I want you to hear why. He has a great rule that he made up, the 90-10 rule. I'm not going to tease what that is. Listen for that. That's about maybe 3/4 through the episode. What the 90-10 rule, why it's so important, how he implements it. And then the final thing I want you to pay attention to is the importance of people. You hear Ryan talk about the great people in his life throughout the whole conversation. And we know through Pursuit, with the R being relationships, the people we surround ourselves are very important, whether it's with business or just life in general. Relationships matter, and Ryan talks a lot about that throughout the whole conversation. This is a very tough conversation to have, being that we're talking with somebody who has such a tough diagnosis, but look at his optimism. Look at the way he's accepting the challenge and going forward. If he can do that with a glioblastoma, then you can do that with anything you have going on in your life. It's not easy, as you're going to learn from Ryan. It's okay to have those scary moments, but you can't let those overcome you and keep you back from pursuing what you want. And for Ryan, it's time. All right, that's enough for this. Let's get to the conversation with Ryan Russell. Before I get to that, as I always end up doing, I remember the last moment. Be sure to follow Ryan, send him support, send him positive thoughts as well. Frequencies matter, energy matters. Send positive energy to him to help him on his battle. But check out his blog to follow along with the progress he's having. And we will keep you up to date as his book drops that he talks about in the episode and all the other things he might do going forward. And I am looking forward to flying out to Pennsylvania and recording an episode with him in person, celebrating his victory over the glioblastoma. So with that, let's get to our episode with Ryan Russell.
Yeah, hey everybody. So Ryan Russell here. I think a lot of people probably on this podcast know me probably most readily from 20 over 10. 20 over 10 is a digital marketing platform specifically for financial advisors. 20 over 10 was acquired by FMG Suite. In October of 2020. So we had a ton of success there and really, really good. But certainly that's not the only thing that I do. I'm also an associate professor with tenure at Penn State University. I'm an author. I've written for a number of publications around the idea of design. So I have kind of a really broad background. But here's what I am not. I'm not a financial advisor. And I think people find that really unusual in the financial space, especially like with 20 over 10 is, and I also made a point, I did not hire anybody, at least in my initial team, specifically from finance either. I have a big thing about that is approaching problems with naivety, and coming to things, trying to solve these problems, maybe in new and interesting ways. And I think it's panned out. But yeah, that's kind of my background. I don't know. Too brief? You want me to go in more detail? What do you think?
No, I think that's good. I think we'll get into 20 over 10 and what that, and kind of what that is. And cause that's one of the things I wanted to highlight is, when I think of people going on their pursuit, you embody that because you built your own business. And I also want to tie into how you have other things that you've done while you did that, the why behind it, the how, because that's kind of how I am. Like I don't go after just one thing. There's multiple things. I do want to point out one thing that you did not mention is that you are an outstanding husband and father as well, which I think is more important than
and that's the most important thing. That's the most important thing. I mean, I'll get into this too, where it's like, if there were like, what are the things that are like most important to you now? Like I can tell you unequivocally, my 3 kids, Hudson is 7, Gracie's 4, Teddy's 10 months. And my wife, Samantha, who I'm sure everybody knows because Samantha has cycled from 20 over 10 being a CMO into a chief evangelist. She still continues to work with FMG Suite. So, she gets a lot of FaceTime. But yeah, absolutely.
And for those watching and listening that aren't in the world of finance, which hopefully the audience of Pursuit is expanding beyond my natural market of advisors, Samantha would be somebody that's good to follow when it comes to content creation because she's a master of it. Like that's where I first met her was through watching what she was doing for 20 over 10. And it was all about education. It was all about content marketing and helping advisors, do a good job, which led to advisors working with 20 over 10. But if you watch the content that she does, I think it is evergreen from the standpoint of it's not just for financial advisors. When she's talking about trends going on in Google. And so even though she might be speaking to a financial advisor audience, if you're not a financial advisor, you can like sub out financial advisor for whatever your profession is. And what Samantha's talking about will be relevant for you. And I'm hoping that there's a lot of creators watching this, either getting started or already on it. So she would be a great resource just to follow, even if you're not an advisor. Well, we've talked about 20 over 10 a couple of times. So let's hop into the origin story of that because I find it fascinating that you weren't a financial advisor. You weren't in the world of finance. You didn't hire financial advisors and you saw an opportunity to build a business because you felt you could do it better. And we were talking about this last time that maybe that was arrogance. I don't think it's arrogance. I think it's confidence, which is important. But coming from the outside, the reason I love that is I hate the way that the finance world continues to use the same colors and images and just is very boring. And I love looking at outside of finance for inspiration for what I've done with my firm and others. So let's talk about the opportunity you saw with 20 over 10. And I also want to hear more about the extension of your passion for design and executing that through a different business, because I think a lot of times people think my passion has to be the business. I love design. I'm going to design creatively, where you still followed your passion for design, but you also found a unique opportunity that maybe you didn't care about finance, but it allowed you to pursue design through finance. So with those ramblings there, what does that make you think? And what do you want to say?
With 20 over 10, it was really kind of different. When people ask what was it difficult to build? I think the answer is yes, because what we really built there were a set of processes around building customizable content, right? That was scalable, right? Like how did we build a company that allowed us to work with individual clients, but meet the needs of thousands upon thousands of advisors? And I think that was really challenging. And it was also a slow build. Like one of the things I think our team was really, really good at is we were able to adapt really fast and pivot. Like we didn't buy into our own BS, we very much, were able to like take our legs. Here's an example, right? 20/10 in its initial iteration was really, kind of an approach to build a sort of finances version of Squarespace, where we really thought people were going to come on, build their own websites, and we were going to be able to scale, boom, like that. And so, we opened the doors and we were expecting the floodgates to open and thousands of advisors to come in and use it. And it was crickets, right? And I think at that point, that would have discouraged a lot of people who just would have been like, throw in the towel. So how do we do this? And so what 20/10 really allowed us to do was think about those processes, build those processes, step in and improve our own tech, right? To be able to adapt and build those. And then what we did was we built outwards. So, we started out with websites specifically, but then we launched Lead Pilot, right? And then Compliance Core. So Lead Pilot was our digital marketing platform that allowed our advisors to really sort of adequately use social within the context of, sort of all the limitations that finance has to, adhere to, FINRA and SEC. And then when you get into Canada, IROC, et cetera. And Compliance Core is sort of like the engine that allows all the compliance teams to be able to review all this stuff, right? So that you can meet those huge enterprise deals. Those are the things that are like really, really challenging to do. So that was it. It was about building processes and scale. And I think we were the first people to really do that level of customization there, which is, I think, is what really got the attention of FMG. And we were really excited to partner with them. They're a great company. Scott White, the CEO there, is just like a fantastic overall human being. Like, let me just say that. And, and we've had a lot of really good experience there. But yeah, I mean, we've had an absolutely incredible couple years with them. I'm excited to see kind of what happens over the next couple years. I mean, sky's the limit. Anytime you think like, oh man, like I know exactly what's coming, it's just amazing how fast things change. Right. And so like making predictions at this point, it just seems ultimately fruitless. Like I feel like it's okay to be proactive, but I think certainly don't buy into your own BS. Be prepared to adapt, because that's going to be a big thing, regardless of business. Like things are going to go left on you. Like that's not you know what I mean? Like it's not like, I hope they don't. It's like, it will. So be prepared. That's, I think probably one of our biggest, our biggest assets is, I think, the people who made up 20/10 primarily. So it was me. I started it, and then I brought on Nick DiMatteo. Nick was my front end designer, front end dev, and then we brought on Samantha. Samantha came on as our CMO, and then Dave Squires, who was our back end dev. And we just had this kind of like really kind of fully formed team. Nobody had really strong, like overlapping disciplines, but we also had like a mutual respect for each other too. So we were able to really communicate ideas about, implementing different, functionality around our software and our platforms. But yeah, so, I mean, a lot of great people. I think, that's really kind of like the secret sauce right there.
Which ties in perfectly to Pursuit. So in the letters of Pursuit, the original 4 letters, R stands for relationships. So relationships is very broad. It's meant to be, but on our Pursuit, who we surround ourselves with just from a support or energy that's put out, or who we support ourselves with as we go build something is really, really important. So it's great to hear that ties into relationships, because it's been a while since I've talked about relationships relevant to Pursuit. I do want to go.
Well, wait. But here's the thing. Here's the thing, real quick. So I don't know if people know this. Obviously, like Samantha and I are married. Nick DiMatteo is a good friend of mine going back to school, right? Mm-hmm. So the only person that I didn't know was I met Dave through 20/10, who was another one of our kind of like 4 key team members. But yeah, so everybody else was like, we surrounded ourselves with like really great people that we knew personally.
So I want to go back to how you landed on finance. So not coming from the world of finance, was it just like, let's put 5 or 6, professions that are industries that are out there that we can go penetrate because we have no experience, and let's throw a dart? Or what was it about? Like, how did you come down to finance?
Yeah, good question. So actually I was living in, I used to live right on Bleecker and Mercer, right outside of Soho. And this would have been in like '07. I was doing a lot of consulting at the time. Most of my friends worked in finance, so I became like really hyper aware of like finance and all of the limitations, especially with like the brokerages and what that means for, marketing and compliance and all of those things. And, going through that, you're just like, Jesus, like this is a nightmare, like how do people actually go in and do creative marketing? And we just figured like there is no way to do it. At the time, I think that was like probably like circa like 2011, then, and I want to say like shortly thereafter, Nick and I got together and we were like, there has to be a better way to do this. Like a software kind of approach. And that's what we did. And it took us a couple years, right, to be able to build that. And we really had to figure out again, because the big challenge was like, how do you do it at scale, right? Instead of just the one-offs. And so that's kind of what we set out to figure out. But like my background was, advising like design in finance and trying to kind of figure a way through. Everybody else was brand new, like knew nothing, right? So there was like a very significant amount of training that had to go in and just sort of like what FINRA and 17A3, regulations are. And then when we moved into Canada, it was like, how do we manage, IROC and some of the similar compliance challenges. It was just kind of like jumping in the deep end, right? And learning to swim. And that was it.
So a lot of people are going to have, a skill or a passion or a craft that they're good at and are looking for a way to turn it into something larger. So similar to what you did with design and finance. You mentioned earlier that you felt like being from the outside, having that almost unblemished view on the profession was a benefit. Can you speak more to how being naive to the financial planning world? I mean, I know you had friends who were working in Wall Street, but like to the business, how is that an advantage, and how could somebody else use that to be their advantage to take their passion to a bigger part of their career?
Oh, that's easy. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. It's very difficult to be intimidated by or scared by something that you do not know exists, right? My Sam asked me, she was like, do you think you would have started 20 over 10 today knowing all that you know? And like my immediate reaction was like, I'll say no. The answer is yes, I would have, because I think I'm arrogant like that. But I think that, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I don't think that I would have, I think that naivety is a huge benefit, like you'll walk on the tightrope if you're not looking down and you can't see how far the ground is. Right. So yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. We'll see. I think so. I think I would have started it.
When I think that coming from the outside, you just bring a fresh perspective. Like growing up in the world of finance, like looking at other financial advisors' websites and learning from them, you see the same thing and you just become conditioned to like, well, this is what a website needs to look like, and this is how I'm supposed to market myself. And when you come from the outside, you're bringing fresh ideas. And I think that's one of the great things that Samantha was able to convey, but 20 over 10 did as well. Is hey, you don't have to be the same cookie cutter that every other. You don't have to use the sailboat. You don't have to use the lighthouse. You don't have to be navy blue. You don't have to have the 65-year-old white couple on your website showing retirement. Like you can. This would be the funny thing though. Like you'd go and you'd see like a company that's repping somebody from like New Jersey, but like on their homepage, it would be like somebody driving, an older white couple driving over the Golden Gate Bridge. Like they don't hold a single, client in California. Like that's insane. And so, but there were like limitations of the software about being able to do like basic things like switch out imagery and like, and so what we were able to do is like really push the boundaries there and set a sort of like expectation that like good marketing has to come with a very high level of customization, not just in like what it says, but how we say it as well. And so, I'm really proud of that with 20 over 10 because, a lot of these 20 over 10 sites like are not cookie cutter, although, you could make the case, well, certainly they are at some level. I mean, there's such a high level of customization that's able to be done to these. I mean, it really is kind of like exciting to see, even looking back on it 2 years post acquisition, to say, wow, we really did something special. That's pretty awesome. I gave you a hard time when we talked a couple weeks ago, and you mentioned that word again just a minute ago, like arrogance. Limited conversations with you and I, but you don't strike it to me as being somebody who's arrogant. I almost feel like when you say you're arrogant, it's a way to downplay your confidence, because I do think there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. And those who are extremely confident and aware of it don't want to come across as arrogant. So it'd be like, we say we're arrogant to kind of downplay it. So people think like, if they think we're arrogant, at least we know about it. I don't think that you're arrogant. So what I want to get to is, I'm trying to give you a compliment and tell you, quit saying you're arrogant, because you're not. It's perfectly fine to be confident. How important is that confidence that might teeter on the level of arrogance? How important is that when you are trying to do something new that hasn't been done before, like 20/10?
I think it's hugely important, right? I think you have to approach this with probably like what I'll call a healthy amount of doubt, but doubt that's being kind of influenced about sort of watching out for what's ahead, right? But not being fearful of approaching a problem. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of my point, is to say, like, I am somebody, right, who is not likely to back down from a challenge, right? And so like, even, and we'll get into this too, like with some health stuff, like, you know, I think that's a personality thing. Right. And I've been like this for as long as like I can really remember. And so I think part of the draw into finance was just, you know, kind of hearing everybody say like, it can't be done in finance. It's too regulated. And it was like, okay, watch me. Like, I'll do it. Like, you know, and they're like, who are you? Like, you never, not even in this industry, you know? And it was just like, because I'll figure out a better way. Like, you know, watch me, and kind of jump right into it. And so I take a lot of pride in that too. And I don't, you know, it's interesting. I guess I never really like thought about it as like kind of a bad thing, because I don't ever feel like, with especially like what we're doing, like I'm pushing anybody else down. It was just like, I'm pushing myself up, you know, and to say like, you know, you're going to be your biggest champion in whatever you do. Right. And so like, I think that's absolutely huge. And yeah, I mean, that's how I've always approached things. That's how I'm always going to approach things. Right. Like I inherently believe that I will be able to do it.
And I think this is why, like, I like you so much right out the gate, is because that's my mindset as well. Yeah. Like I don't think there's anything that I can't do. Like, I think if I wanted to, I could start a restaurant and it would be successful. And restaurants are one of the hardest ones. Like, I think there's anything that if I want to do, I can go do it. And a large part of that is my mindset. And it's the confidence that I've had throughout my whole life. Is there anything, or was there anything that you do to help maintain that mindset? Because I'm sure we could each go back through our lives and all the successes that we've had, found failures along the way that a lot of people look at it as a failure, and that pulls them off that path. It knocks down their confidence and makes them think they can't do it. Where because of our mindset, for whatever reason, the way we're wired, that failure is just a learning lesson. It doesn't do anything to our confidence, and we just keep on going. So I don't know if there's anything that, I know you said you've been that way for as long as you remember, and I'm the same way, but there are things I do to help me maintain that. Like the second I get a negative thought, like I acknowledge it, and then I shut that shit down and I focus on something positive. But is there anything like that you do that helps you maintain? Because I think a lot of people want to be optimistic. They want to maintain that confidence, but there's so many other outside influences and just human emotion that makes it hard.
Yeah, man, that's a good question. I mean, probably the biggest knock to my confidence was the most recent health stuff, right? Like that I'm going through. And as most people can tell, there's definitely some health stuff. I'm not normally bald, right? But like, this is a byproduct of radiation. I was diagnosed with brain cancer, right? And so this is relatively well known now, kind of in the space because of my wonderful wife who really put it out there as we were evaluating treatment options. But yeah, I mean, that was a really kind of scary moment. I mean, I was suffering from headaches privately, migraines, but like real migraines, ones that would put me down for like 2 days. And finally went in to get an MRI, went into the MRI with the techs, right? And they kind of put you in the tube and you're in there for 45 minutes while they're scanning you up and doing all the good stuff. And when they pulled me out, and I was just expecting like it'll be the same, 2 techs. And, but this was like the very last one of the day, like 8:30 at night. It's like dark in the room. It's dark like in the hospital. When they pull me out, the techs aren't there. The radiation oncologist is. And just as like, we have a very serious situation. I need you to come with me immediately. Mm-hmm. And they walked me over across the hallway, sat in a private room to basically give me the diagnosis to say, we've never seen anything like this before. This is incredibly bad. We need to life flight you. Mm-hmm. And so from basically going in there thinking, you know, hey, in 50 minutes, I'll be home being able to play with my kids. They were like, we got to put you on a helicopter and we have to get you to the University of Penn. And at the University of Penn, they went and they did a craniotomy, and ultimately it was confirmed that I had what was called a grade 4 glioblastoma, right? Here's the thing about this. Grade 4 glioblastoma is like worst of the worst, right? It's basically saying like, you don't come out on the other side of this, right? Like the survivability is this, right? And I can tell you, in fact, I'm not just saying this for the podcast. When I heard that, like when I heard like 0% survivability, my brain immediately went to, well, there's got to be a first one, you know, like, so mm-hmm. might as well, like dibs, I'll do it. And went in, trying to think, we got a craniotomy. That would have been May 3rd. And I actually got going from thinking like, this isn't somebody who's likely going to come out of the hospital to less than, 28 hours later, mm-hmm. Being sent home. Mm-hmm. And everybody's like, what the hell is going on here? Like, this is like really, really odd. Mm-hmm. Right. And, and then we just went to work and it was like, okay, we got a thing and this thing is really bad. Right. But I feel reasonably well. So how can we manage that? Meds, how can we, kind of do these things? And, I stand by this. Like, I will never, ever back down from this disease. I don't care if it's like my last moment. Like, I will take this thing to school. Like, I will be the very first person to beat glioblastoma. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're after now. I mean, it was a really difficult diagnosis. And I think it's something that like really should have shaken me far more than it did. And don't get me wrong. Like, I still have my weak moments, right? Where you feel kind of really down, but I'm ready to go. I'm ready to battle this thing every day. And so now I'm just like, holy shit. Like, if this thing can't take me down, like, I'm invincible. Like, mm-hmm. Bring it on. Let's go. And that's the way I approach it because listen, what else is there? Mm-hmm. I'm against a wall. Like, I have no other options. Mm-hmm. So it's time to fight. And that's what we're going to do.
Going back to that moment where you saw the dark room, you see the radiation mm-hmm. oncologist, and they tell you like this diagnosis, like, how did time move in that moment? Do you remember? Stopped
completely. Like I you go into, and maybe this is just me, but I went into a kind of like, I had a sense of denial of the whole mm-hmm. thing. But the other thing too, that kind of gave me an opportunity to kind of process through it was they didn't know what it was. They mm-hmm. looked at the MRI and the MRI looked so bad because it had all of these, really dark areas. So I have what's called a multifocal, brain tumor, right? Where there's kind of one right here and it's large. And then there's two. There was one up here and then one over here. And the one I got resected was in the front left. And, but at the time it was like, I remember at the time thinking like best case scenario, doctors were talking about, oh, this is MS. Mm-hmm. That was my best case scenario. Right. Mm-hmm. And MS is a devastating disease as well. But it was something that came with longevity. Glioblastomas don't. Right. Mm-hmm. And I feel like $1 million today, Mm-hmm. I went through 2 treatments today. I'm going doing this with you now. Like that's, and I'm not going to slow down,
Mm-hmm. In my planning process, going to my financial advisor mm-hmm. hat, I have questions I ask clients when they first come in and start a planning process. Yeah. And they come from George Kinder, so life planning. But the last one is, you find out, they all center around mortality because I've found, and I think about myself, when I think about my mortality, that's where you really find the truths, like the things that matter the most. And the last question is you find out today is your last day. And it's not what would you do? It's like, what would you regret? Who did you not become? And for me, when I get those answers from my clients, that's what I want to take to their plan and say, all right, if that's the thing you cared about the most and you're not mm-hmm. doing it today, what do we need to change going forward with your planning so that if that diagnosis ever came, you look back with the minimal amount of regrets? Mm-hmm. I lead into that with, or I lead in with that just to see, from that diagnosis, what have you changed from your mindset, perspective, how you move? Like, how did that change you going forward, or did it change you at all?
What I value. Mm-hmm. It's crazy. I sort of really defined success early on as wealth, but traditional wealth, mm-hmm. right? Like I was lucky enough to sell a company. I was, a professor at Penn State. And so kind of with that always came these accolades and all the things that I think success in business or success in academia, sort of, come with. But what I found is like, as I kept kind of ramping up, getting more accolades, like sold the company, all of these things, I wasn't getting any happier. Like looking back on it, like I can tell you, like I was not a happier person for it. I was more stressed. I was spending less time doing the things that I really loved. And so, on May 3rd, when I came out of the hospital, May 4th, when I came out of the hospital, somebody asked me, what is it you value? And like immediately, like without reservation, I was like, time. It's time. Mm-hmm. Time is the biggest thing. Like you could give me all the money in the world. Like it didn't make me happier. Like the things that I missed, like time with my kids, like that's what I really wanted. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to somebody about this, every day since it, May 4th has been the greatest day of my life, right? Where like, what do? I'm so excited to make it to the end of the day. I cannot explain it. And I can tell you on, all of those days, like being able to coach the teams and being able to like play with the kids and see them. I mean, it's been huge, but it was a shock to me because I grew up around success being defined as financial success and well-being. And then I got all that stuff and I felt, I don't want to say empty because I certainly like accomplished it, but it was like, oh, okay, well, I'm not feeling it yet. So maybe I just got to get to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. And I was just trying to double down. And in reality, like what this showed me was just like time. Mm-hmm. That's where your value is. It's time.
And the truth of the matter is, like, you have an official diagnosis, and I'm going to go on the record. Like, we're going to have multiple conversations on this podcast over time.
Absolutely.
Because like, I'm not just saying this. Like, I told my wife as soon as I saw Samantha's post, and it made me emotional. Like to see that, I told her, I said, like, I know. There's no doubt in my mind that he's going to beat this. Like, I know that for a fact. Like, you're going to be the first one who does it. Hey there. Sorry to interrupt. I will be quick. I know we want to get back to the rest of this great conversation with Ryan Russell, but I had to address one thing. I've got a lot of questions lately about these hoodies you see me wearing. And yes, Pursuit does have a clothing brand. You may or may not know that. We've had hoodies in the past, which you can see the remaining ones back there on the rack. But one of my goals with Pursuit was to create a lifestyle brand that would support those on their pursuit. Make you look good, so you feel good and you be good all the way along on your pursuit. There's a fall drop coming, and if you are a subscriber to the Weekly Pursuit, the weekly email that I send out, you will have first access to this hoodie and the other ones coming out. So if you haven't subscribed, head on over to pursuit.co, go up to the library. There'll be a post you'll see to get you signed up for the Weekly Pursuit, so you'll know when these drop first. I'm starting to get the pieces in now, so it won't be long. All right, let's get back to the conversation. But before I let you hear the rest of Ryan's story, do me a favor. Head on down to the comments and share with Ryan and let him know how much his story means to you. What have you taken away from it? And what are you going to change about your pursuit to make sure you're maximizing the time that you have in this life and doing the things that you want to do? So how are you going to break out of your box? Let Ryan know so he gets all of this love and lets him know the impact he's having on all of you. So head to the comments real quick, and then we'll get back to the story with Ryan. So I share that because I just want everybody to know the confidence I have. And I know I know this is not lip service. Like, I know that you are 100% going into it, but we all have this diagnosis. Like, the T in Pursuit is time. And I love the Stoics, and the Stoics talk a lot about the time. So most people, and yourself included, it's when you get this diagnosis, now that you know for a fact that the time might be closer than we thought, that we reprioritize. But we are all dying every single day. Every single one of us wakes up, and it could be our last day to exist and to be with our family. And we just and I'm not perfect. Like I need to be better about this, but the reality of it is we shouldn't wait until the doctor tells us something, because every day is potentially our last day. So
you could walk out tomorrow, right, and get hit by a car. You could get into a cab and get into a car accident. I mean, you could be suffering from, some disease that you're just simply not aware of yet. And so, I talked to a doctor about this, and he was just like, no. Let's make sure we're framing this properly. Like, you just got a heads up that your movie might be ending before someone else's, but it's not guaranteed. Like, we don't know. Like, one of the things that we're doing is like aggressively pursuing really wonderful experimental treatments. Here's one of them, right? So, one of the ones that we're really, really excited about is we're working with a company based out of Tübingen, Germany. And basically it's a personalized vaccine for cancer based around the genetic makeup of my tumor, right? So this treatment is specific to me. So when you think about a vaccine and you think about, like, say, COVID, for example, and that COVID vaccine can be rolled out across like hundreds of thousands, millions of people, this is only going to be appropriate for me. And so, we're going to be heading over there on December 14th to get my initial kind of, I guess, deployment of this vaccine. And that's just wild to me. Like, I'll be over there for that first 4 days getting a vaccine and then these boosters. And then I'll be heading back to Germany every like 5 weeks to be getting boosters. And essentially what this vaccine does is it's training my body to be able to fight this tumor using, like, from the inside, if that makes sense. So it's very, very difficult to battle brain tumors, right? Like, from the outside, that brain blood barrier is really difficult to penetrate. But if we can come from the inside out, that gives us a real fighting chance. And so, we're scheduled to go over there, December 14th. And one of the things, like, Sam and I have been talking about is just like, the first time's probably going to be a little bit weary, like, just, what to get used to. But then when I have to go back every 5 weeks, well, let's bring the kids. Let's make it a vacation. Like, let's actually celebrate the opportunity, right? I mean, it's obviously still like a very difficult thing, but to do some international travel. This is something like Sam and I have always been really big into, is like international travel. And one of the big fears, honestly, was like, with this diagnosis was like, does that stop? Right? Because there's like a fear, like, in mind, like, I don't want to be out of the country, like, away from like my doctors, and like, there's, some reservations there, but this company CGAT and is just fantastic. And we're super excited about it too. So I think our first deployment over there is December 14th, and we'll be over there for 4 days at their place. So we'll let you know how it goes.
Is getting over there part of the cool part? I think part of the cool part of the story is when Samantha shared your story, like, it basically went viral. And connections were made to get you guys talking to different hospitals faster than you probably would have gone on your own. Is this one of the venues, or was that the one that was over in Japan? Okay. That's pretty cool.
So the two that we were really evaluating aggressively were CGAT, which is out of Tübingen, Germany. The other one was a clinical trial that was happening over in Japan. And unfortunately, in clinical trials, there's just, kind of more challenges, a lot more red tape. And there just wasn't as much, as far as we understood it, right? Like, as much research behind it. Like, the clinical trials were only like 13, 26 people, like really, really small. CGAT was doing something at a larger scale, and from what we understand, has seen some really, really wonderful results from it. So we feel really good about this. And will this be the last step? I don't know. But my feeling is it's a heck of a first step, and we're ready to battle. And so they're going to stand alongside us in this fight. And I couldn't be more thrilled to have it.
One of the things I love about you and the way you look at this challenge, for lack of a better term, however you want to frame it, is like the framing of everything. And, I think so many people in this world today are unhappy, and it's because of the way they frame things. You have a very shitty thing happening right now, but yet everything you've talked about has been from a positive perspective. The framing of, all right, well, I got to go to Germany, so let's make it a family trip and do this international travel that we want to do. And so many other people could have been like, oh, I got to go to Germany. I'm going to be away from home and see the negative in it. So I want to highlight that because our perception becomes our reality. Framing it doesn't make the diagnosis go away, but framing it makes it more livable, enjoyable while the time goes on. But I do believe framing it that way, law of attraction, it's going to be bringing positive energy your way, which is only going to help your fight. If you're bringing more negative energy towards you, I think it makes it harder. So I wanted to highlight that for viewers and listeners, just framing. Like if Ryan can frame the trip to Germany to get the personalized vaccine for his brain cancer in a positive way, then you can frame whatever you're going through in a positive way as well, which I think will ultimately be a benefit for whatever it is you're going through.
Oh, and you should hear, the messages I get are like, hey man, should I so I'm also going to come over, but should I rent skis over there? Should I bring my own? And I'm like, hey man, let me focus on the brain cancer. You worry about how to get your skis over there. I don't know what to tell you, man. I'm not going to be skiing with you, but yeah, it's kind of interesting because and don't get me wrong. I think I am, for all intents and purposes right now, incredibly positive around this thing, but I do have a rule where it's the expectation is not to be positive 100% of the time. That's unreasonable, especially with a diagnosis like this. People would be like, you're on drugs, right? They'd be like, there's just no way. And so I have something called the 90-10 rule. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know if I made this up or I heard it somewhere and just kind of made it my own. But my rule is 90% of the time, I'm going to be uncomfortably positive. 10% of the time gets substantially darker. Right? Here's the thing. Don't fight against that 10%. Just sit with it. You know what I mean? That feeling's going to suck. And your responsibility is just to let it be for a while. Just make sure that next day when you wake up, you can get back into the 90, And generally I used to call it the Sunday scaries. Right. And just kind of reframe what the Sunday scaries were. Mine's now how I emotionally deal with brain cancer. But used to be Sunday evenings, right? I would just get this sort of crushing, sort of dark cloud over me. And, I actually talk with somebody fairly regularly now, just kind of to how to kind of mentally frame these things, who really positioned me to say, don't push those feelings away. Just sit with them. It's okay. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be mad. It's okay to be frustrated, just move on from it, right? Be able to handle that thing and process it. And so, yeah, I feel really gifted. I'll say too, you asked me this, just one of the things that I think I'm most proud of, for me, is how incredibly lucky I've been to surround myself with such wonderful people. That, I don't know, that's just something that kind of just flooded into my brain, where we were talking about 20 over 10 and Nick and Dave and Sam and all these people. And now I'm talking about Dean Schrock, who's part of my, kind of people who really helps me kind of process a lot of this stuff. You got to surround yourself with a great team. If you really want to win, don't expect to do it by yourself, because you won't, right? You can't. That's not how any of this goes. Find really great people and make sure you lean on them.
And not just in business, in life. If you want to win.
I'm talking about in life.
Yeah.
Listen, I think it all overlaps, right? Because people are like, well, tell me about how, academia relates to, business and entrepreneurship. I actually don't see them as having really big walls between them. They all flood into each other. Right. And I think, you and I were talking before the podcast, but it's what you been up to? And I was after treatment, I wrote a book. And I illustrated it, and now I'm trying to get it published. And this all happened since, May 5th, and it was basically just, kids are at camps and schools and things. And so I'm like, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to write a book, right? Now it's a children's book. So let's not think I'm writing some sort of academic literature that's going to be some sort of earth. But I think it's just kind of a really cool opportunity to explore and do some other creative things and see just how far we can kind of flex these kind of skill sets, because I don't think writing a children's book is actually going to be that much different than entrepreneurship, starting a digital marketing company in the financial arena, or doing, kind of design and UX in academia and teaching user experience and user interface design. So, I mean, I think there's so much overlapping between these skill sets. I think people are just not aware.
Mm-hmm. I had another thought that comes back up to the 90-10. I'm glad you said that, because I was listening to you. It made me kind of aware of maybe my tilt towards optimism is the answer too much. And I think the reason I do that is because so many people are pessimistic. I feel like I need to balance the scale a little bit. But I do agree that you're never going to be fully optimistic. And I think that is a great breakdown of the 90-10. And giving permission to people just to sit with those feelings. I think the key is, and what you said, and maybe I frame it a different way, is not when that 10% happens, not allowing that 10% to get to 15, to get to 20, and begin to take up too much of your mental space. Are there any best practices? Maybe it's talking with your friend or whoever, but how have you found it possible to maintain that 90-10? That when you have that 10, to sit there, acknowledge it, allow yourself to feel that way, but not allow it to become 11% and then 12% and then kind of grow. How do you do that? How do you work through that?
I'll be honest with you. I mean, it's really necessary for me to talk to someone. And I don't think that's something everybody has to do necessarily, because I understand like it becomes like a resource thing too, but it's something that, I've been able to leverage professional help there to say like, hey, I'm having a rough time. I want somebody to walk through this with me. Right. And so, I've been able to connect with Dean Schrock, who, believe it or not, is actually a family friend from when I was a child. And so he lives out in Oregon, and he's absolutely incredible. And I think, he's been so wonderful, because one of the things that's been so great is he tends to pose a question and then just kind of stay silent and step back. And what I found is I'm a pretty chatty person. So like, he'll ask a question, then like an hour later, I'll finally finish answering. But yeah, I am a big believer in talking to people now. I think especially, after this, and it's not easy. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, there are some times when like you're in the 10, man, and it's hard to get a word out, because you're just, what I mean? You're in tears. Like it's a really tough thing to be battling through. And what I want to say is just like, if you have that opportunity to talk to somebody, whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member, whether it's a colleague, whether it's somebody who's a professional, in this field, do it. Do it. Like, you're not bigger than this thing, and you shouldn't feel like you have to be. Right. We're all on the same team. This is why, like, when I say like, I'm here to win, I'm not here to win to push somebody else's head into the mud so they lose. I'm just here to win. I want them to win too. If we can all win, that's great. My priority is me, obviously, right now, but like, I'm a big believer in that. Right. So I don't know. I would say talking to people, and if you can talk to somebody professionally, do it. I mean, it's crazy to think that you're tougher than some of these things. Mental health is a huge thing right now across the United States. We see it in academia a ton. I'm doing it. I believe it or not, I speak to a professional 3 times a week. 3 times a week. Since sometimes I don't have anything to say. Just catching up. Hey, how are you? Like, hey, miss you, man. How was your birthday? What was it? And then you're just sort of on for 10, 15 minutes. Other days, it's like a full hour where you're like, oh man, here's what's going on. This is terrible. I don't know how to manage this, how to handle this, just take it as it comes, right? Adapt. Like I said, it's no different than starting a business, right? It's just about naivety and just sort of buying into, you don't know what's coming next. So just be prepared to adapt, On May 28th, I was going into that appointment thinking like they were going to prescribe me some pills for the headaches. I came out and didn't go home, so like that expectation was not there for me before that. So anyway.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time. I've got a few kind of like rapid fire-ish.
Yeah, let's do it.
But before we get there,
okay.
I do think your story is going to open the eyes and have the attention of the audience, maybe more than any guest that I've had, given, what you're going through. You mentioned time was the thing that's most important to you and valuable to you. What advice would you give to listeners to try to help them wake up, figure out what they value the most, just position themselves that if they were to go into the MRI and had the same experience to you, that they wouldn't have to change much of their life because they were already doing it before they got the heads up about their movie. So from your experience, what would you encourage people to either do or figure out to avoid getting caught off guard?
I'll tell you what, I told my story in, I think a decent amount of detail, and what I'm going to ask people to do is a really uncomfortable thing. And I want you to stand in my shoes. And all of a sudden, if you recognize that you're not going to be here forever, potentially, right? And that maybe your movie's going to end a lot sooner than you thought. I would tell people, listen, pick your 10 favorite things right now in your life, and then immediately take 5 and throw them away, right? You have 5 left. From those, take the 2, okay? Now you have 2 things out of your original 10 that really, really mean something to you. Those are the 2 that you focus on. And I'd just be curious to see how people react. My feeling is that the majority of people will throw away the physical wealth, the assets, all of those things. And I think most people are going to find that it's time. Time is the thing that they really wanted. It's the thing that they really needed the most. But who knows?
All right. Let's get to the rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So,
all right.
First and foremost, if you weren't doing what you're doing currently, what would you be doing?
I'd be a writer.
Okay.
Or honestly, like an artist too. I think I come from a fine arts background, believe it or not. So I think this is kind of unusual, although like some of my favorite people that I've met in the fintech space have come from like art history and, really surprising backgrounds. So I think I'd probably live there. I'd probably if money wasn't an object, and I think I would probably either a writer or I would exist in fine arts.
So I'll challenge you. I know you've got your 2, so maybe we add 2.5. Okay. Well, never mind. You did it. You wrote a book. I was gonna say find some time to draw or to write, but you wrote a freaking book, so you're already doing it.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to send this to you because I'm trying to figure out kind of like what the next steps are here because we're trying to secure a publisher, but it's a children's book. It's really awesome. It reads both right side up and upside down, so it's got this really unique format. Yeah, I'll send it to you. Maybe we can link to it once we get it up there in space. Yeah. But this book's really unique in that you can read it right side up from the perspective of this little girl. And then the whole story is about her being irritated with her shadow. When you finish the book, you turn it around and you get to read the exact same story from the perspective of the shadow. Yeah. So it's a really unique format without leaving the kind of the traditional format of a book. But anyway, yeah, that's neither here nor there, but a really cool thing. So.
Oh, that's awesome. It makes you think of Kendrick Lamar's Damn album. He
Absolutely.
Released it, and then he re-released it going from last song to first, and it was like the same songs but played backwards tell a different story. So dope. Yeah,
absolutely. It's awesome, man. And I think too, art really has that opportunity because it's pervasive. So like you can get into so many different industries with this, and like even how you want to monetize it, right? Like publishing, coming at it as an illustrator is really unique. So
how'd you come up with the idea to write, upside down?
Yeah, good question. So man, that's I started it, I'm trying to think. There was a mentor of mine who worked at Penn State. His name was Lanny Samis, unbelievable designer, still one of my favorite designers to this day. He passed away recently, and he had a book design class, and I took it, and it was just, he was such the way he thought was so bizarre, and the challenge that he levied to the class was create a unique story using the traditional format of a book. And the sort of right side up, upside down was kind of like my approach, a much different story. And so I ended up being able to kind of repurpose that idea more recently after the craniotomy.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if there's any symbolism to the little girl in the shadow. Like, is there something about this experience that the shadow represents something that has come out of this that, I don't know, I've got to believe there's some symbolism to that either you're aware of or you're not aware of.
Listen, I got to tell you, it's probably certain that if I were to like hand this over to Dean, like the guy that I talk to fairly regularly, like, without a doubt, I'm sure there could be books written on this. I don't know them yet, but like they're almost certainly there for sure. That's
pretty cool. Sticking with design, who company wise, what's your favorite company? What company has the best design besides 20/10?
I'll tell you what, it's really interesting because I'm going to go a different route. Like I was thinking about this and, I don't go for inspiration to people like in my field or industry. Like I tend to like, for like when I'm thinking about design, even when I'm thinking about 20/10, like I'm tending to look at things like, more traditional fine arts, music, other entertainment. One of my favorite designers though right now is a little bit less traditional because he's actually a book jacket designer who I think is just absolutely incredible is Chip Kidd. Chip Kidd was a graduate of Penn State graphic design way back in the 80s, so way before me. One of the single most talented designers I've ever seen. I mean, I once watched him give a presentation on all of his failed book jacket designs, and I can tell you that every single one of them was better than any like book jacket that's out there today. The other one is, I just mentioned him, he was my mentor, is Lanny Samis, right? He was a poster designer by trade. But what both of these individuals did, which I always thought was like so powerful, is they were so heavily rooted in concept and ideas. And so they just were never regurgitating stuff that they had seen. It was always original ideation. And that's one of the things that I really took away from like 20/10 as an example, to say like, I don't have any desire to build a thing that's going to like make sure everybody has a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge, even though they live in Delaware, right? Like we really want to get to giving people an opportunity to have a unique message to their website, but frame it in ways that are really highly customizable, but being able to do it at scale. So yeah, I think probably my answer to that is probably as a designer, Chip Kidd. I mean, he's somebody I go to and look at his retrospectives a ton. And then Lanny, unfortunately, who just passed away, but was a really close friend of mine too. Those two guys were pretty great, are pretty great.
I love design. I'm not like, I don't have an eye to create good design, but I know good design when I can see it. I bought a whole bunch of books I wanted to read and like learn. Like, what people don't realize is that true design work, like there's a reason the circle on that card is a certain size and it's placed right there. Like nothing is like by chance. It's all thought through that we just don't realize. And I'm fascinated by that. Like I wish I had that talent. It's one of the like the shiny objects that just, it interests me. I wish I knew more, but I don't. So I just appreciate it and keep going forward. So I think it'd be kind of cool. Maybe I wrote it down, like maybe for Pursuit in the future, as the audience grows, have you back and do like a webinar on like the basics of design. So anybody out there who wants to learn about it, just like the top 5 things, we can spend like 45 minutes going over them and how to think about it. Cause I think it's so fascinating. I mentioned shiny object of design. Another one of my shiny objects that I wish I was talented at is music. So I love music. When you're doing some design, let's say you're working on design or you're really getting into a good zone, like what's the album or what's the musician or the type of music that you're listening to?
Yeah. So I'm coming from this from like all over the place. Right. Okay. So, and I'll kind of explain why. So I have little kids, right? And surprisingly, like my son has like really good taste in music. So like one of the things that he loves, Queen. Okay. So like during treatment, every single day, so 33 days of radiation, right? Not including weekends, I would go in and I would listen to Queen's We Are the Champions. But like their entire album is like, it's incredible, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Hudson is also really loves Fits and the Tantrums. So like we listen to them a ton. I'm trying to think. One that I actually love is like Zach Brown Band. Like I think there's so much there, and I don't think they necessarily overlap stylistically like pretty aggressively, but that's been probably taking up the majority of my headspace lately, just because in the cars we've been just like going through those albums. But the Queen one, like that was like religious, right? Like every way on the way to treatment, it was like Queen absolutely blasting We Are the Champions. And there's something about that song, man, that, you know, it's so great. It's so powerful. The whole thing is like this idea of we, it's not centered on the individual. And I think I kind of like thought about that all through treatment subconsciously, where like I never felt like, I still don't feel like I'm going through this by myself. You know, like I think about like having this on the podcast, like you're somebody who's like, you know, I always call them like my cancer crew, right? It's just like when we beat this, like we will beat this, like, right? And then we will be back on this in 10 years and like, we're going to be figuring it out. Like, how do we do it? Like, this is crazy. And so, yeah, that's kind of an offshoot to your question, but yeah, Queen's incredible.
That's awesome. How do you define success for you?
Oh, time. I'm going to go back to it, man. Time with my family. I've been able and I'm lucky that I've been able to be traditionally successful. But what I will tell you is when time was taken away from me, or at least it was implied that it was going to be taken away from me, I felt empty. And I recognized that time was the thing that I couldn't get back. I can build another business, right? Like I can do all those things, but I can't get time back. Once that time passes, it's behind me now and I can't reach back and grab it. And so that's the thing I need to prioritize more. You know, I've always been somebody who's, I've always tried to one up myself. And, that was something that was a big shock. And I didn't anticipate that, you know, and I wish I would have, because I think it would have saved me a little bit. But I'm lucky enough that like my kids are younger. And so I still have that opportunity to like prioritize like the baseball games and the football games and dance. And Teddy's only 10 months. So he just like, you know, chews the furniture and is kind of like a little wild child. But yeah. And even with my wife too, you know, it's like we prioritize dates now and, you know, it's crazy.
Well, I know that you have your blog and I wanted you to publicize that here in a minute, but the final question, going back to music, this one, maybe it's going to be the same answer, but if you were a keynote speaker, what would be the song that you're coming out to? And part two of that question is that song to hype you up or is that song to hype up the crowd?
I think it's going to be both. I think it is going to be the same answer. I think it's going to be We Are the Champion. And I can tell you if I'm pumped up, everybody around me will be pumped up too. Like I will have that entire stadium standing, right? Like, because if I can get that energy behind it and I'm as psyched, and that really means something to me, you know, when like this was like my anthem to be able to like go into cancer and to basically say like, you know what? I'm going to beat this thing up now. Like this is absolutely my opportunity to take a stand against a disease that's devastating and flip it around and make it my thing. And, it's definitely, We Are the Champions. And I think it's for everybody, you know, and that's the thing. Like we are like that whole idea of this being a joint effort has been everything, right, in this disease. And then kind of the fight that I'm going through now. And, you know, but I don't think it's unusual. Like, I think everything that we do has been something like where I've addressed as we oddly, and I think you pointed it out. And I never really realized it, where it was just like, I am not arrogant enough to say like, I could do this without like my partners and my friends and my family. You know, even I think about like 20 over 10, it's like you remove one of those pieces and it doesn't work, you know? But you get good people around you, and that's the best possible thing. You know, there's, you know, you ever read Good to Great, right? You get the right people on the boat, and then you figure out where to steer it. That's what we did. That's why 20/10 was so great, but we do the same thing at Penn State as well. Right. So, yeah.
So I appreciate you coming on and sharing, the passion of 20/10 and how you built that. But I'm really glad we spent more time on like the life lessons that you're observing now and sharing with others. That's really what I was hoping to get to. I knew we would, but I want to thank you for being vulnerable and comfortable enough to share all that, because I'm sure, 90/10, it's still not easy to talk about that stuff. But I know it's going to change at least one person's perspective and change what they do in their life. And like, that's my aim for the podcast, is if we can just get one person to pursue a passion or change their life or make more time, like, then this a wild success. I don't care about how many people here. All we need is one person to make a change. So I want to thank you for doing that. How can everybody follow along? I know you've got the blog, but where do you want people to go? And then we'll certainly make a big deal about the book when that drops and get that out there and all those things.
Yeah, so maybe what I can do, Justin, is I can share the URL, but the URL that I have right now that we're really focused on is called My Gray Matters. So my-gray with an e-matters.com, and there's a lot of really good stuff on here. So we're blogging about progress. So this comes with every major treatment, every trip to Germany, all the stuff that we were kind of talking about. So you can stay up to date with my and kind of my team's approach to this really devastating disease. However, this disease doesn't only apply to me, nor should it. And so we have a number of resources that we share as well. And so in here we talk about, people can access clinical trials, immunotherapy, general resources around cancer care and things like that I'd love to be able to share with those going through a cancer struggle or a brain cancer struggle. There's a lot of really great stuff here. What else? I don't know. There'll be more stuff coming. We'll share it through the website and some of our social channels. So you can find us on, ryanrussell.design. We do a lot there as well. And then certainly you can follow along with Samantha. She's still super active on social media, Samantha Russell, through FMG. She is now the chief evangelist at FMG Suite, and she does such an incredible job. She's so talented. It's really incredible. So I'm lucky to have her. She's way out of my league, and I just don't think she's recognized it yet. And so just please don't tell her, and we'll get there. But yeah.
Well, I'll have links to all those on the blog. They'll be down in YouTube as well, so people can find it real easily to make it easy to find. And then we'll continue to keep everybody up to date as you have these new, books and things that come out as well. So, all right, man, I appreciate it. I look forward to doing another one of these. I told you last time that the next one we record will be in person. I'll fly out to Pennsylvania. I'll bring my cameras and everything, and we'll do it in person to celebrate and talk about what's going on at that point. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your vulnerability. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. I hope that you take Ryan's story and just take some time to sit with it and then think about your life and what's most important. And if it's time or whatever it might be, change some things within your life. That's what the pursuit is about. It's about pursuing the life that we really want. So if we get a diagnosis like this, we're not scrambling to change a whole lot. We're already living that life, and now we can go to battle or whatever it might be. So thanks for tuning in. And as always, let's keep pursuing.
Yeah, absolutely. Justin, thank you. You're the best.
Thanks, Ryan.